You see these massive floating palaces, bigger than most houses. They're worth hundreds of millions, decked out with gold fixtures and marble floors. The parties on these yachts are insane. A-list celebs, billionaires, and models everywhere you look. But there's a dark side to all this luxury. When night falls and the yachts set sail, things get sketchy. You hear whispers about yacht girls and see young women being shuttled between boats. Some look way too young to be there. The glitz hides some ugly truths. These floating playgrounds for the ultra-rich ain't all fun and games. What really goes down when they're out at sea, far from prying eyes? The answers might shock you. Mega yachts. They're not just boats. They're floating mansions that cost more than most people will see in a lifetime. We're talking serious cash here. These things are the ultimate status symbol for billionaires. A way to say, I'm so rich, I can literally buy a small cruise ship just for me and my friends. Take the Serene, for example. This beast is worth $500 million. That's $500 million floating on water. But that ain't even the most expensive one out there. The Eclipse? That'll set you back $1.2 billion. Billion with a B. That's more than the GDP of some small countries. These yachts are decked out with every luxury you can imagine. We're talking helipads, swimming pools, movie theaters, spas, you name it. Some even have their own submarines or mini hospitals on board. It's like they took a five-star resort and decided to make it seaworthy. But here's where it gets crazy. These billionaires are dropping hundreds of millions on these floating palaces while there's still so much poverty in the world. Like, you could probably feed a small nation for what one of these yachts costs. And don't even get me started on the environmental impact. These mega yachts burn through fuel like it's going out of style. We're talking thousands of gallons per hour. That's a whole lot of carbon being pumped into the atmosphere just so some rich dude can party in the Mediterranean. And you know what's wild? A lot of these billionaires talk a big game about fighting climate change and helping the poor, but then they turn around and buy these massive polluting boats. It's like, which is it? You want to save the planet or you want your floating mansion? Take Mark Zuckerberg, for example. Dude's always going on about how Facebook is gonna help connect the world and solve big problems, but then he drops $500 million on a yacht. That's a whole lot of connectivity and problem solving that could have been done with that money. But it ain't just about the money. These yachts are like floating countries with their own rules. When you're that rich and that far out at sea, who's gonna tell you what to do? It's a whole different world out there, away from prying eyes and pesky laws. Environmental hypocrisy. These billionaires who own these massive polluting boats, they're the same ones preaching to us about saving the planet. Take Mark Zuckerberg, for example. This guy's always talking about how Facebook is going to change the world and solve big problems. He's donated millions to environmental causes and claims he wants to fight climate change. But then, he turns around and drops $500 million on a yacht. That's a whole lot of world-changing money going into a floating mansion instead. And Zuck ain't alone. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, all these tech billionaires love to talk about sustainability and green energy, but their actions, they tell a different story. These mega yachts are environmental disasters. They burn through fuel like there's no tomorrow. We're talking thousands of gallons per hour. That's more fuel in a day than most people use in a year. And it ain't just about the fuel. These yachts dump tons of waste into the oceans, messing up marine ecosystems. The carbon footprint of these things is insane. One study found that the average super yacht emits about 7,020 tons of CO2 a year. That's more than 1,500 times what the average person in the US puts out, and that's just from operating the yacht, not even counting all the pollution from building the thing in the first place. But these billionaires don't seem to care. They'll fly private jets to climate conferences, then hop on their mega yachts for a relaxing cruise. It's like they're living in a different world where the rules don't apply to them. And maybe that's part of the problem. When you're that rich, you're so disconnected from reality that you don't see the harm you're doing, or maybe you just don't care. After all, when you've got billions in the bank, what's a little environmental destruction? But here's the thing, these billionaires have the power to make real change. They could be using their money and influence to develop green technologies, fund renewable energy projects, or find ways to clean up the oceans. Instead, they're spending it on floating palaces that are killing the planet. It's not just about the yachts either. These guys own multiple mansions, private jets, fancy cars, all stuff that's terrible for the environment. But they keep telling us regular folks to reduce our carbon footprint. It's like they're saying, do as I say, not as I do. And that's the real kicker. These billionaires want us to believe they care about the environment, but their actions say otherwise. They want the good PR that comes with being eco-friendly without actually having to sacrifice anything. But here's a wild thought. What if they actually practiced what they preached? Imagine if Zuckerberg took that $500 million and put it into developing sustainable yacht technology instead of buying a mega polluter. Or if Bezos used his billions to create a fleet of zero-emission cargo ships instead of joyriding on a super yacht. The social ecosystem of yachting. Only the richest and most famous people in the world. And think about it. You've got billionaires, Hollywood stars, supermodels, and business moguls all hanging out in the middle of the ocean. It's like the most exclusive party you could ever imagine, but it's happening on a boat that costs more than most cities. These yachts are where the real networking happens for the ultra-wealthy. It's not just about partying and showing off. These people are making deals, forming alliances, and planning stuff that affects the whole world. And they're doing it while sipping champagne on a golden deck chair. But it's not just the billionaires and celebs. There's a whole ecosystem that forms around these floating palaces. You've got the crew, of course, but then there's the entertainment. DJs, musicians, performers, all flown in to keep the party going. And then there's the yacht girls. Now, we're not going to get into all the details just yet, but let's just say these aren't your average party guests. They're models, aspiring actresses, influencers, all hoping to catch the eye of someone rich and powerful. Some of them are there just to have a good time and network. Others, well, it gets a bit more complicated. Eli Nahas, who used to run a modeling agency, spilled some tea about what goes down at events like the Cannes Film Festival. He said, every boat has about 10 girls on it. They are usually models, and they are usually nude or half-nude. Now that's something you won't see in the glossy magazines. This whole yacht culture has been going on for decades. We're talking over 60 years of models and actresses participating in these arrangements. And why? Because they think it'll help their careers. Get noticed by the right person on the right yacht, and maybe you'll land that big movie role or modeling contract. But here's where things start to get murky. When you mix that much money, power, and alcohol, the lines between networking and exploitation start to blur. You've got young women trying to make it big, surrounded by some of the most powerful men in the world. And all this is happening in international waters, far from any real oversight. Emily Ratajkowski, you know, the famous model, she wrote about her experiences with yachting in her memoir. She didn't name names, but she hinted that this kind of thing is way more common than people think. It's like an open secret in Hollywood and the modeling world. The power dynamics on these yachts are intense. You've got billionaires who are used to getting whatever they want, whenever they want it. And then you've got young women who feel like they need to play along to get ahead in their careers. It's a recipe for some seriously sketchy situations. The ugly truth: exploitation on the high seas. So we've seen the glitz and glamour of these mega yachts, but now it's time to pull back the curtain on what really happens when they're out at sea. And let me tell you, it ain't pretty. These floating palaces aren't just about fancy parties and business deals. There's a dark underbelly to this world that most people never see. We're talking exploitation, coercion, and some seriously sketchy stuff going down. Take the Cannes Film Festival, for example. It's supposed to be this classy event celebrating cinema, right? But when night falls and the parties move to the yachts, things get real ugly real fast. Eli Nahas, who used to run a modeling agency, spilled some tea about what goes down at Cannes. He said, every boat has about 10 girls on it. They are usually models, and they are usually nude or half-nude. Now that's not something you'll see in the festival highlight reel, but it gets worse. These aren't just wild parties. There are allegations of straight-up exploitation happening on these yachts. You've got young women, some of them barely out of their teens, being pressured into situations they're not comfortable with, all because they think it'll help their careers or get them noticed by the right people. An anonymous actress shared her experience yachting in Europe, and it's pretty messed up. She described it as a traumatic ordeal filled with unwanted sexual advances and exploitation. This ain't some fun vacation, it's a nightmare for these women. And it's not just about sex. There are reports of drug use and other illegal activities happening on these yachts. A former super yacht deckhand talked about seeing some wild stuff, including orgies and hard drug use. When you're that rich and that far out at sea, who's gonna stop you? But here's the really scary part. There are whispers about human trafficking. Now, we don't have concrete proof, but think about it. You've got vulnerable young women being shuttled between boats, often in international waters where laws are fuzzy. It's a recipe for some seriously dark stuff. And the worst part? Everyone knows it's happening, but nobody wants to talk about it. It's like this open secret in Hollywood and the modeling world. These powerful men think they can do whatever they want because, well, they usually can. The culture of yachting is all about secrecy. What happens on the yacht stays on the yacht, you know, but that secrecy is what allows this exploitation to keep happening. People are scared to speak out because they don't want to lose their shot at fame or success. It's a messed up power dynamic. You've got these uber-wealthy guys who are used to getting whatever they want, and young women who feel like they have to play along to make it in their careers. It's not hard to see how things can go south real quick. And it's not just a few bad apples, this stuff is systemic. It's been going on for decades. We're talking over 60 years of models and actresses being caught up in these arrangements. And why? Because they think it's their ticket to the big time. But let's be real. Most of these women don't end up becoming big stars. They just end up used and discarded, while the rich guys move on to the next batch of young hopefuls. And it's not like this is some big secret. Emily Ratajkowski, the famous model, wrote about her experiences with yachting in her memoir. She didn't name names, but she made it clear that this kind of thing is way more common than people think. The really messed up part is how normalized it's become. Like, there are actually terms for this stuff. Yacht girls is a pretty well-known phrase in certain circles. It's code for women who hang out on these boats, often in exchange for gifts or career opportunities. Young and vulnerable. We're not naming names here, but there have been some seriously concerning allegations floating around social media. Posts hinting at minors being involved in these yacht parties. It's not just adult models and actresses anymore. We're talking about girls who are way too young to be in these situations. Think about it. These yacht parties are already sketchy enough with grown women. But throw some underage girls into the mix, that's a whole new level of messed up. And it's not just a few isolated incidents. There are reports of this happening all over the place. Cannes, Monaco, you name it. The really sick part is how these young girls get pulled into this world. They see all the glitz and glamour of the yachting lifestyle on social media, fancy parties, hanging out with celebrities, living the high life. It looks amazing from the outside, but they don't see the ugly truth behind it all. These yacht owners and their rich friends, they know exactly what they're doing. They use all that luxury as bait, promising young girls a shot at fame or a modeling career. But it's all just a trap to get them on board and take advantage of them. And it's not just random rich guys doing this. There are rumors about some seriously high-profile celebrities and businessmen being involved. We're talking A-list names here, people you'd never expect to be mixed up in something so disgusting. The worst part? A lot of these girls don't even realize what's happening to them. They think they're just going to a cool party or meeting important people who can help their careers. They have no idea they're walking into a situation where they might be pressured or forced into stuff they're not ready for. And once they're on these yachts, out in international waters, who's gonna protect them? There's no cops, no real laws out there. These billionaires and their crew can pretty much do whatever they want. It's not like this is some big secret either. People in the entertainment industry have been talking about it for years, but nobody wants to be the one to blow the whistle. They're all too scared of losing their careers or getting sued. Even when victims do try to speak out, they often get shut down real quick. These rich guys have armies of lawyers and PR teams to make problems disappear. They'll threaten lawsuits, pay people off, whatever it takes to keep things quiet. And it's not just the yacht owners who are to blame. There's a whole network of people involved in this. Talent agents, party planners, even some parents who are willing to look the other way if it means their kid might get famous. The crazy thing is, this has been going on for decades. We're talking all the way back to the 60s and 70s. It's like this dark tradition in the world of the ultra-rich. Each generation of billionaires and celebrities just keeps it going. Hollywood's open secret. Let's start with Meghan Markle. Yeah, that Meghan Markle. There's been a ton of chatter online about her supposed connections to yachting. Now, we ain't saying it's true, but there's a lot of smoke around this fire. People have been sharing this photo of Meghan on a yacht, saying it proves she was involved in the whole scene. And there's all these claims floating around about her connections to rich dudes before she met Prince Harry. Again, nothing's proven, but it's got people talking. But Meghan ain't the only one caught up in this mess. There's a whole bunch of celebs who've been linked to yachting over the years. We're talking models, actresses, even some big-name singers. The crazy thing is, a lot of them got their start right around the time they were hanging out on these yachts. Emily Ratajkowski, you know, the famous model, she spilled some tea about her experiences in the yachting world. In her book, she talks about getting paid $25,000 just to show up at events with rich clients. That's some serious cash just for looking pretty and making small talk. But it ain't just about the money. Emily hints that there's way more going on behind the scenes. She mentions a Victoria's Secret model who was getting cozy with a wealthy client at a party. She doesn't name names, but it's clear this kind of thing is pretty common. The really messed up part is how normal this all seems in Hollywood. It's like an open secret that everyone knows about but nobody wants to talk about. You've got these young actresses and models who think they gotta play the game to make it big. And the power dynamics in Hollywood make it even worse. You've got these big shot producers and execs who can make or break careers. They use these yachts as their personal playgrounds, and a lot of people feel like they can't say no if they want to succeed. There's even a term for it: yachting your way to stardom. It's this idea that if you hang out on the right boats with the right people, you might land that big role or modeling contract. But at what cost? The thing is, this ain't new. This stuff's been going on for decades. We're talking 60+ years of models and actresses getting caught up in these arrangements. It's like this dark tradition that just keeps getting passed down. And it's not just a few bad apples. This is systemic. It's woven into the fabric of Hollywood and the modeling world. You've got agents setting up these meetings on yachts, party planners who know exactly what kind of girls to invite, and a whole network of people who keep this machine running. But here's the thing, people are starting to talk. With social media and all these online platforms, it's getting harder to keep this stuff under wraps. You've got anonymous accounts spilling tea, former yacht girls sharing their stories, and even some celebs hinting at what really goes on. That mini documentary about yachting that went viral? It's got people asking some serious questions about their favorite stars. It talks about all these connections between celebs and the yachting world, and while a lot of it ain't proven, it's got people thinking. The craziest part is how this all ties into the bigger picture of exploitation in Hollywood. We're not just talking about yachting anymore. This connects to all kinds of sketchy stuff. The casting couch, predatory producers, all of it. It's like this whole ecosystem of abuse that's been allowed to thrive for way too long. History repeats. Rich folks have been showing off on fancy boats for over a century. Remember the Titanic? That ship was like the OG super yacht of its time. The Titanic was massive, over 880 feet long. That's about the same size as some of today's biggest mega yachts. And just like modern yachts, it was decked out with all kinds of luxury stuff. First-class passengers had fancy suites, fancy restaurants, even a fancy gym. But here's the crazy part. All that luxury was just for a tiny fraction of the people on board. Most passengers were crammed into tiny cabins below deck. Sound familiar? It's the same deal on today's mega yachts. You've got the billionaire owner and their rich friends living it up, while the crew is packed into tight quarters working long hours. The Titanic was all about showing off how rich and powerful you were. If you could afford a first-class ticket, you were part of this exclusive club. It was like a floating party for the elite. And that's exactly what these modern mega yachts are. Floating palaces for billionaires to network and show off. But just like the Titanic, there's a dark side to all this luxury. Back then, third-class passengers were treated like they weren't even human. They were kept separate from the rich folks, had worse food, worse accommodations, everything. And if something went wrong, well, we all know how that turned out. Today's yacht crew ain't got it much better. They work crazy hours, deal with entitled rich people, and are expected to keep their mouths shut about whatever they see. And just like on the Titanic, if something goes wrong out at sea, you can bet it's the crew and the less powerful guests who are gonna suffer. The Titanic was a symbol of the huge gap between rich and poor back in the early 1900s. And these mega yachts, they're doing the same thing today. We're talking about boats that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, cruising past countries where people are living on a few bucks a day. And it ain't just about money. The Titanic was where the rich and powerful made deals and connections that affected the whole world. Same thing happens on these modern yachts. Billionaires and celebs are out there making decisions that impact all of us, all while sipping champagne on their floating mansions. But here's the really messed up part. We haven't learned anything in the past 100 years. The Titanic disaster showed how dangerous it is to put luxury and showing off ahead of safety and fairness. But look at these mega yachts. They're basically floating environmental disasters, burning through fuel like crazy and dumping waste in the oceans. And just like how the Titanic's owners ignored warnings about icebergs, today's yacht owners are ignoring warnings about climate change and exploitation. They're so wrapped up in their bubble of luxury that they don't care about the consequences. The allure of luxury and exclusivity. That hasn't changed one bit. Back then, people were obsessed with the Titanic, dreaming about what it would be like to be one of those first-class passengers. Today, we're still doing the same thing, gawking at pictures of celebs on yachts and dreaming about that lifestyle. But here's the thing, that obsession with luxury is what allows all the bad stuff to keep happening. People are so blinded by the glitz that they don't see the exploitation, the environmental damage, all of it. It's like we're all passengers on a modern Titanic, ignoring the icebergs because we're too busy admiring the fancy chandeliers. And just like the Titanic, a lot of these yachts are disasters waiting to happen. You've got inexperienced owners, overworked crew, and a whole lot of people who think the rules don't apply to them because they're rich. It's a recipe for trouble. The psychology of yacht ownership. Owning a mega yacht might seem like the ultimate flex, but it comes with some serious psychological baggage. These billionaires are dropping hundreds of millions on floating mansions, but a lot of them end up feeling guilty and isolated. Think about it. You're sitting on this massive boat that costs more than some countries' GDPs, while there's people out there struggling to eat. That's gotta mess with your head a bit. And it does. A lot of these yacht owners end up feeling super guilty about all the excess. But here's the crazy part. They keep doing it anyway. It's like they're caught in this weird cycle where they feel bad about having so much, but they can't stop showing off their wealth. It's all about status and keeping up with the other billionaires. And let's talk about that isolation. You'd think being on a massive yacht would be one big party, but for a lot of these owners, it's lonely as hell. They're out there in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by people who only hang around because they're rich. That's gotta be a pretty empty feeling. A former super yacht deckhand spilled some tea about what really goes down on these boats. He said, cleaning up after sex parties, orgies, drug binges, and even slaughtering animals to provide fresh food was just part of the job. That's some wild stuff, but it shows how messed up things can get when you've got too much money and too little oversight. But here's the thing, these billionaires can't just stop. They're under so much pressure to keep up this image of success and luxury. It's like they're trapped in a gold-plated prison of their own making. They gotta have the biggest boat, the fanciest parties, the most famous guests. It's exhausting just thinking about it, and all that pressure, it leads to some pretty sketchy moral compromises. When you're so focused on maintaining your status and lifestyle, it's easy to turn a blind eye to the bad stuff happening around you, like those yacht girls we talked about earlier. A lot of these billionaires probably know it's messed up, but they just ignore it because it's part of the scene. The desire for status and exclusivity is a hell of a drug. These yacht owners will do almost anything to feel like they're part of this elite club. They'll spend millions on boats they barely use, throw parties for people they don't even like, all just to feel like they belong. But belonging to what? A group of people who are so disconnected from reality that they think it's normal to have a submarine on their boat? It's like they're living in a whole different world. And maybe that's part of the problem. When you're that rich, you're so isolated from normal life that your moral compass starts to get all messed up. What seems crazy to us regular folks might seem totally normal when you're surrounded by other billionaires. Emily Ratajkowski touched on this in her memoir. She talked about how the experiences tied to yachting can blur the lines between career advancement and personal integrity. It's like, where do you draw the line when everything around you is so excessive? But here's the really messed up part. A lot of these yacht owners know what they're doing is wrong. They feel guilty about it, but they keep doing it anyway. It's like they're addicted to the lifestyle, even though it's making them miserable. And it ain't just about the yachts. This whole mindset bleeds into every part of their lives. They're constantly trying to one-up each other, always chasing the next big thing. It's never enough. There's always a bigger boat, a fancier car, a more exclusive party, but at what cost? These billionaires are sacrificing their peace of mind, their relationships, and sometimes even their morals. All for what? To impress a bunch of other rich people who are probably just as miserable as they are. Breaking the silence. An anonymous actress spilled some tea about her time yachting in Europe, and it's pretty disturbing. She said it was like a 3-hour nightmare of groping and staring. This ain't some fun party, it's straight up exploitation. And it ain't just one person's story, there's a whole bunch of women who've come forward with similar experiences. They talk about feeling pressured to do things they weren't comfortable with, all because they thought it might help their careers. But here's the really messed up part. A lot of these women were way too young to be in these situations. We're talking barely legal, sometimes even underage. And these rich dudes knew exactly what they were doing, using all that luxury as bait to lure in young girls who didn't know any better. Emily Ratajkowski, you know, the famous model, she wrote about her experiences in her book. She said she got paid $25,000 just to show up at events with rich clients. That's some serious cash, but at what cost? Emily hinted that there's way more going on behind the scenes than people realize. She mentioned a Victoria's Secret model getting cozy with a wealthy client at a party. She didn't name names, but it's clear this kind of thing is pretty common. But speaking out ain't easy. These billionaires and celebs have got armies of lawyers and PR teams to shut down any bad press. They'll threaten lawsuits, pay people off, whatever it takes to keep things quiet. And it's not just the yacht owners. There's a whole network of people involved in this. Talent agents, party planners, even some parents who are willing to look the other way if it means their kid might get famous. One former yacht girl said she felt like she couldn't say no to anything that happened on the boat. If she complained, she'd be blacklisted from future gigs. And in an industry where your next job depends on who you know and who likes you, that's a big deal. Another woman talked about how she thought yachting would be her ticket to stardom. Instead, she ended up feeling used and traumatized. She said it's like this dark cloud that hangs over her, even years later. But here's the thing, people are finally starting to speak up. With social media and all these online platforms, it's getting harder to keep this stuff under wraps. You've got anonymous accounts spilling tea, former yacht girls sharing their stories, and even some celebs hinting at what really goes on. That mini documentary about yachting that went viral, it's got people asking some serious questions about their favorite stars. It talks about all these connections between celebs and the yachting world. And while a lot of it ain't proven, it's got people thinking. But speaking out comes with a price. A lot of these women face threats, harassment, and even legal action when they try to tell their stories. They get called liars, gold diggers, all kinds of nasty stuff. It takes some serious guts to stand up against that kind of pressure. And it ain't just about the individuals. This whole yachting scene is part of a bigger problem in Hollywood and the modeling industry. It's all connected to issues like the casting couch, predatory producers, and the way young women are treated in these industries. A call for change. First off, we need some serious regulations for these floating mansions. Right now, it's like the Wild West out there on international waters. These billionaires think they can do whatever they want because they're far from land. But that's gotta change. We're talking about stricter rules for yacht owners and crew, background checks, mandatory training on exploitation and human trafficking, stuff like that. And not just for the big boats. Even smaller luxury yachts need to be held accountable. But rules are useless if nobody's enforcing them. We need some real oversight, like international maritime patrols that actually have the power to board these yachts and check things out. No more of this, what happens on the yacht stays on the yacht nonsense. Transparency is key too. These billionaires love their privacy, but when it comes to potential crimes and exploitation, that privacy's gotta go. We need a system where crew members and guests can report sketchy stuff without fear of losing their jobs or getting blacklisted. And it ain't just about the yachts themselves, we gotta look at the whole ecosystem around them. That means cracking down on modeling agencies and talent scouts who are funneling young women into these situations. It means holding accountable the party planners and event organizers who turn a blind eye to what's really going on. But here's the thing, all the rules in the world won't matter if we don't change how we think about this stuff. We've got to stop glamorizing this whole yacht lifestyle. It ain't all champagne and caviar. It's exploitation and environmental destruction. Next time you see some celeb posting yacht pics on Instagram, think about what might really be going on behind the scenes. Is that really a fun party, or is it something more sinister? We gotta start asking these questions. And it ain't just about the celebs. We need to look at how the media portrays this whole luxury lifestyle. All those reality shows about yachts and billionaires, they're selling us a fantasy that hides some ugly truths. But here's where you come in. Yeah, you, the person watching this video. You've got more power than you think. Public opinion is a hell of a thing, and it can make even billionaires sweat. Start calling out celebs and influencers who promote this yacht culture without acknowledging the dark side. Use social media to spread awareness about what's really going on. Support organizations that are fighting against exploitation in the entertainment industry. And when it comes to your own life, think about where your money's going. Are you supporting companies and celebs who are part of this problem? Maybe it's time to rethink those choices. But it ain't all doom and gloom. There's some good news too. More and more people are starting to wake up to what's really going on. That viral documentary about yachting, it got people talking, and when people start talking, things start changing. We're seeing more celebs and industry insiders speaking out about their experiences. People like Emily Ratajkowski are using their platforms to shed light on the darker side of the modeling world. And while it might not seem like much, every voice counts. There's also been some progress on the legal front. Some countries are starting to crack down on human trafficking and exploitation in their waters. It's a start, but we've got a long way to go.